the discovery that separated humans from nature. For most of human existence, there was no boundary between people and the world around them, because survival depended on blending in, adapting, and moving with nature rather than standing apart from it. The distinction between human life and the broader environment simply did not exist in any meaningful way, because every aspect of daily experience was shaped directly by natural forces that humans neither controlled nor questioned. To understand what separated humans from nature, we must return to a time when storms were not disasters, animals were not resources, and landscapes were not owned, but simply forces to live alongside. Early humans responded to the environment as part of it, not as something external. There was no concept of nature as a separate category, because there was nothing to contrast it against. The world was not a backdrop to human life. It was the substance of it. Hunger came with seasons. Shelter followed terrain. Danger arrived without explanation. Humans adjusted constantly, shaped by weather, land, and movement. Every decision was a response to conditions that could not be negotiated with, only navigated. The relationship was intimate, immediate, and total. Survival meant reading the environment with extraordinary attention, because the cost of misreading it was injury, starvation, or death. But slowly, a subtle shift began to form. Humans started seeing patterns not just as cycles, but as systems that could be anticipated, altered, and controlled. Tools reshaped environments. Fire bent landscapes. Ownership divided space. Each of these developments represented a small step away from pure responsiveness and towards something new. The ability to impose intention on the natural world rather than simply reacting to it. Nature stopped being only a context. It became an object of intention. Humans began clearing land instead of avoiding it, redirecting water instead of following it, storing resources instead of consuming them immediately. Each action pushed a small distance between humanity and the natural flow. What had once been an unbroken continuity between human activity and environmental process began to fracture as humans created pockets of managed space within the larger, unmanaged world. This was not rejection of nature. It was separation through control. And once humans stepped outside the system they once lived inside, their relationship with the world changed forever. The shift was not dramatic or sudden. It accumulated through countless small decisions, each one widening the gap between human activity and natural process by an imperceptible degree. Because when you no longer feel part of nature, you begin to treat it differently. And that difference was about to define everything that followed. As separation deepened, humans began organizing the world around human needs rather than natural rhythms. Because once nature could be altered, it could also be managed, optimized, and dominated. Land was cleared and reshaped. Rivers were redirected. Animals were enclosed and bred. Seasons were planned around instead of endured. The environment stopped being a partner and became a system to control. The transformation was comprehensive, touching every aspect of how humans related to the physical world. This brought security. Food became more predictable. Shelter became permanent. Life felt safer than it had ever been. Humans no longer waited for nature's permission to survive. The anxiety that had characterized earlier existence began to ease as human management of the environment became more effective. But this control carried distance. Natural limits felt less immediate. Consequences felt delayed. Damage became something that happened elsewhere or later. The feedback loops that had once kept human behavior in check began to stretch and weaken as the scale of human activity grew. Nature turned into a resource. Forests became materials. Animals became units. Water became supply. The language humans used reflected the shift. What once lived became something to use. This transformation in language was not superficial. It reflected a deeper change in perception, one in which the intrinsic character of natural systems was replaced by an assessment of their utility. As generations passed, this separation became normal. Humans forgot what it felt like to move entirely within natural systems. Artificial environments replaced wild ones. Comfort replaced awareness. Children grew up in managed spaces, and the experience of being embedded in an uncontrolled natural environment became increasingly rare. Yet the more control increased, the more dependence followed. Systems required maintenance. Failures caused collapse. Humans were no longer adaptable in the same way they once were. The flexibility that had characterized earlier human existence diminished as life became organized around fixed infrastructure. This tension grew quietly. Mastery over nature brought prosperity, but it also removed resilience. The world became less forgiving because humans had made themselves fragile within it. The systems that provided comfort also created vulnerability, because any disruption to those systems now had consequences that earlier, more adaptable populations would have absorbed without crisis. Separation had given humans power, but it had also removed humility, and that imbalance was building toward a reckoning. As humans pushed further from natural limits, the consequences of separation became impossible to ignore because systems built on control eventually revealed their fragility. Environmental changes accelerated. Resources depleted. Landscapes altered faster than they could recover. Feedback from nature arrived delayed but amplified. The accumulated impact of generations of managed extraction and modification began manifesting in ways that could no longer be dismissed as isolated or temporary. Humans responded with more control, more technology, more optimization. Each solution created new problems. Complexity increased. Responsibility diffused. The instinct to manage through additional intervention deepened rather than ease the underlying tension, because every new layer of control added new dependencies. The distance between cause and effect widened. Actions taken in one place reshaped ecosystems elsewhere. Consequences arrived long after decisions were made. The scale of human influence had grown so large that the relationship between any single action and its ultimate impact became nearly impossible to trace, making accountability not just difficult, but structurally elusive. This made accountability difficult. Harm became abstract. Damage hid inside numbers and averages. Nature's response felt unpredictable, even though it followed clear patterns. The patterns were visible to careful observation, but the complexity of interconnected systems meant that predictions were uncertain and consequences distributed unevenly. Yet humans also gained awareness. Observation revealed impact. Science measured change. Evidence accumulated. The illusion of separation began to crack. The same methods of careful observation that had driven the original separation now provided the tools to see its consequences. People realized they were not outside nature at all. They were inside it, influencing systems that influenced them in return. Control had not removed connection. It had only hidden it. The realization was unsettling because it meant that every action taken under the assumption of separateness had consequences reaching far beyond what had been intended. This realization created conflict. Comfort clashed with responsibility. Progress confronted limits. The question shifted from what humans could do to what they should do. The ethical dimension of the relationship with nature moved to the center of human concern. Separation had gone too far, and understanding that fact was forcing humanity to reconsider its place in the world. The climax of separating from nature was not control, but realization. Because once humans understood the cost of distance, they began seeing the illusion it had created. Nature was never something outside humanity. It was a system humanity lived within. The boundary between human civilization and the natural world, which had seemed so solid and so obvious, turned out to be a construction, a story humans told themselves to justify the way they had organized their lives. The belief that humans stood apart had driven progress, but it also justified damage. When nature became an object, it became expendable. When limits felt distant, responsibility faded. The logic of separation made exploitation feel reasonable, even inevitable, because if humans were not part of the system, then the system's health was a secondary concern. Now, those limits are visible again. Climate shifts, ecosystem strain, consequences arrive faster and harder than before. The delayed feedback that allowed earlier generations to ignore the cost of their choices has begun arriving with urgency and a scale that demands response. This does not mean humanity must abandon progress. It means redefining it. Separation gave humans power. Reconnection demands wisdom. The challenge is not to reverse the developments that separation made possible, but to pursue them with awareness of connection and consequence. The future depends not on return to past, but on remembering relationship. Control must be paired with understanding. Technology must align with systems it affects. The tools that separation produce must now be guided by the awareness that reconnection requires. The discovery that separated humans from nature is still shaping our choices, and whether it becomes our greatest mistake or our greatest lesson depends on what we do next. So, what do you think? Are we ready to see ourselves as part of the world again?